And our first speaker is Peter Kissmann, who will be speaking and who is presenting joint work with Jörg Hoffman entitled What's in it for my BDD on causal graphs and variable orders in planning.
Okay, thank you. So basically what this paper is about is, well, more or less given on this slide. As we all know, among other things, memory is a scarce resource in planning, and there are several ways to tackle this problem. And the way I have handled it so far in the last 6 years or something like that is to use symbolic search based on BDDs. Well, in order to use BDDs efficiently, we need to find a good variable ordering, which is computationally hard. What we need to do is to find an ordering that brings the dependent variables as close together as possible. That will typically decrease the BDD sizes quite a lot. And so far in planning, the dependence of variables is typically determined by means of the Causal graph. And the question we started out with is there actually any correlation between the meaning of the dependence as captured by the Causal graphs and the meaning of dependence as we need it for the BDDs? So before I actually start, let me cover some basics. First of all, binary decision diagrams, or BDDs for short, are a data structure that are great for representing Boolean formulas and as such also can store big sets of states. A BDD basically is a directed acyclic graph with several internal nodes. Each internal node corresponds to a binary variable, and the two outgoing edges correspond to the valuation of that variable. Additionally, there are two terminal nodes called the sinks, and any assignment or any state corresponds to a complete assignment to every single variable, and this in turn corresponds to a complete path from the root node down to one of the sinks. And if the path ends in the one sink, we know that the corresponding state is part of the set of states that are represented by this BDD. Now, what makes BDDs great in terms of memory is a fixed variable ordering. So if the variable ordering on any path, on every single path is fixed, we can apply some reduction rules. Well, that's basically it. Now to the Causal graph. In a Causal graph, we have one node for every variable of the planning task. And we have an edge from a node V to a node V prime if both nodes appear in the effect of the same action, or if V appears in the precondition of an action that has V prime in its effect. And in our paper, we considered several basic Causal graphs. First of all, we considered the chain Causal graph, additionally the fork Causal graph, then the inverted fork, more generally directed acyclic graphs, and as limiting cases, empty graphs and arbitrary graphs. And, well, we can see that there's some kind of hierarchy between all these graphs. So any empty graph is a special case of a chain, a fork, and an inverted fork. Any of these is a special case of a DAG, and so on. Now, what are the different notions of dependence? Well, in case of Causal graphs, dependent variables are typically connected by an edge. So two variables are connected by an edge if they appear in at least one common action. So basically the meaning is more or less when we change the value of one variable, we typically have to change the value of the other variable as well. In BDDs, on the other hand, well, those represent Boolean functions phi. And in case of planning, these functions are typically layers of states that share the same distance from either the initial state or the set of goal states, depending on the search direction. And if many assignments to a subset of the variables immediately determines the truth value of this formula phi, then it makes sense to group these variables close together, and they can be seen as being dependent upon each other. Okay, in our paper we started with some theoretical stuff. So basically we were considering several ordering schemes. What is an ordering scheme? An ordering scheme basically is a mapping from a planning task to a set of variable orderings. And, well, we were considering mainly two ordering schemes. The one is based on the notion I had implemented earlier in Gamer, so we called it Omega GA, Omega Gamer. This maps a task to the set of orderings that try to bring the variables that are connected in the causal graph as close together as possible. And an additional ordering scheme we considered is based directly on the causal graph, so we called it omega CG. This basically captures all the topological orderings of the variables in the causal graph. Now, in order to assess the quality of the ordering schemes, we need a classification framework. So given a family of planning tasks, where in our setting such a family of planning tasks typically has the same causal graph and some search direction, we have different notations for the ordering schemes. Well, we call an ordering scheme perfect if every single ordering within this scheme guarantees the BDD of minimal size for every single layer in every single task of this family. We call it safe if no ordering brings super polynomial overhead anywhere. We call it viable if at least one task in every single layer brings at most polynomial overhead, but there might be some orderings that bring super polynomial overhead, and we call it not viable if there's some task where there's some layer from some task where every single ordering of our scheme results in super polynomial overhead. So basically, these are the results that we achieved in our paper. Let's start at the left. For empty causal graphs, we could show that, well, basically any ordering is safe, so no ordering brings more than polynomial overhead. For the chains, things are a bit more difficult. There, we are pretty sure that our two ordering schemes are safe, but we didn't find a proof yet. So these two are actually the only positive cases we could identify. Everything else is rather negative. So for forks and inverted forks, both ordering schemes are not safe. So both ordering schemes definitely contain orderings that in some layer of some task bring super polynomial overhead. And starting with directed acyclic graphs, both our ordering schemes are actually not viable. Now, how can we prove these negative results? For this, at least in the examples I show in this talk, we use the so-called disjoint quadratic form, which looks something like this: x1 and y1, or x2 and y2, or x3 and y3, and so on and so on. For this function, it is known that if we store the x and y variables in a pairwise manner, that the resulting BDD is of polynomial size, or actually in linear size. While if we separate the x variables from the y variables, the resulting BDD will be of exponential size. And that's a notion that we'll make use of. So let me outline the proof for the fact that both ordering schemes are not safe for inverted forks. Here I only consider the backward search, but the forward search is basically proven quite similarly. So the idea behind this is to design a planning task when some layer, this DQF, corresponds to the sets of states. So we designed such a task with the variables x1 through xn and y1 through yn, and an additional variable g, which is true in the goal state. And additionally, we have n actions, each setting g to true if a pair of xi and yi is currently true. So if x1 and y1 are true, we can set g to true, same for x2 and y2, and x3 and y3. So overall, that's a corresponding causal graph, and we can see that's an inverted fork. Now, in this case, if we consider the states that have a distance of 1 from the goal, for those states we know that g must be false, and additionally, the DQF must hold. So x1 and y1 must be true, or x2 and y2 must be true, and so on. What are the orderings that are inherent in our ordering schemes? Well, in omega GA, g is placed in the middle, and there's no further constraint on the x and y variables. Similarly, with omega CG, g is placed at the very end, and no further constraints are there for the x and y variables. So that means that both ordering schemes contain instances or contain orderings with at most polynomial overhead and also with exponential overhead, which shows that they are not safe in this setting. For directed acyclic graphs, we can show that the ordering schemes are not even viable, and basically the proof is quite similar to the one before. So we start with the same causal graph, and we add some additional actions, namely setting some variable xi to true if xi minus 1 is already true, which brings us some edge like this, and the same for all the y variables. Now, here the ordering scheme omega GA places G again in the middle, and either places all x variables before G and all y variables after it, or the other way around. And omega CG places first all x variables, then all y variables, and G at the end. So basically both ordering schemes split the x and the y variables apart, so all orderings inherent in these schemes bring super polynomial overhead. Okay, so much for the theoretical stuff. Now in practice, we implemented some variable orderings, some based on the schemes directly on the causal graph, and some 5 additional orderings that we found in the model checking literature. And as a benchmark set, we took the optimal task from IPC 2011. And we compared our orderings against some good and some bad delimiter. First of all, the bad delimiter, so how bad actually are our orderings. Here we compared against 5,000 random orderings, and, well, we performed only forward search and with a time of 1 minute to keep things feasible. And we considered only the coverage that was achieved. And here we can see the Gaussian distribution of the random orderings, and all the vertical lines correspond to some of our fixed orderings. And, well, most orderings are somewhat better than the Gaussian distribution, but one ordering, which is from the model checking area, is right in the middle of the Gaussian distribution, and another one, which is surprisingly the level heuristic, which we took from fast downward, it's actually worse than random orderings. So it's below the peak of the Gaussian distribution. Okay, but how good are we actually? Most orderings are not completely bad, but how good are we? For this, we compared against dynamic reordering. Dynamic reordering basically means whenever the BDD reaches a certain threshold, the variables are automatically reordered, hoping to reduce the BDD size again. And this is done over and over again, so it's pretty time-consuming. But here we are only concerned about BDD sizes, so we didn't care much about the runtime. That's why we gave the dynamic reordering a total of 6 hours versus only 30 minutes for the static orderings. And here this graph basically shows the result. On the x-axis, we see the peak BDD sizes for our dynamic reordering, and on the y-axis, the peak BDD sizes for our static orderings. And, well, it's quite clear what we see here. The static orderings are nearly always worse than dynamic reordering, and in several cases they're even 3 orders of magnitude bigger. Well, the resulting BDDs are 3 orders of magnitude bigger than when applying dynamic reordering. Okay, that actually brings me to my conclusion. First of all, what we did here was we proposed a new framework for assessing the quality of ordering schemes. And we started over with this question whether there's any connection between the dependencies based on causal graphs or the dependencies we need for BDDs. And the answer seems to be, well, no, not much. So causal graphs don't seem to be too good a source of information for ordering our BDDs. And, well, in the empirical results, things look pretty much the same. So we found that some orderings are actually worse than random, and overall, all orderings are far, far behind dynamic reordering. So basically, all we did in this paper is achieve lots of negative results, and, well, unfortunately, so far we don't have any idea how to overcome this problem or how to find better reorderings. But, well, that's the way it goes. That's it. Thank you.